only you can record, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, we are going live in 1 second.
Okay, I'm going to let everyone in.
Just 1 second.
Amazing. Welcome, everybody. It is so great to see so many of you joining us today on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. We definitely appreciate your time and your attention. As in true form, as we've been doing all week, if you'd like to use the chat function and let us know when you're tuning in from, it's always so cool to see where everyone is right now. Good to see you, Paul. You've been a real trooper. All right, without further ado, welcome. Hi, Heather, welcome. Again, don't be shy, the chat is your friend. This is a great way to kind of engage with not only the speakers, but with yourselves as well. So don't be shy to type in where you are and make comments and ask questions. Nigeria, that is so cool. I love that. Welcome. Welcome. Trying to do a quick calculation of what time it is there. Wow, thank you for joining us. It's evening time for you, so we appreciate it. Great. Langoy, very good. Amazing. So my name is Valerie Ndiweni. I'm a member of the CATS team, and I am joined by my colleague, Diana Viola. Want to say hi?
Hi.
So Power Skills has been something special for us. It's been an amazing week, and for those of you who have joined in on other sessions, we hope that it has been useful. We hope that it has been inspiring. And as we close the conference, what better way than to celebrate the power of communication? We're joined by an amazing group of individuals. I would like to introduce the moderator today, Dhabisha Kohilanathan. Did I say it right?
Perfect. That's
amazing.
perfect.
Dhabisha is an incredible individual, incredible professional, and I have the pleasure of engaging with her in different contexts. She's an administrator at McGill University, but she's also someone who is passionate about community building. And she is also on the board of the Student Association for the McGill School of Continuing Studies. I'm going to say the full name, McGill Association for Continuing Education Students. It is a mouthful, but we are called Macy's, M-A-C-E-S, not the store, but M-A-C-E-S. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dhabisha.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Valerie. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion on the power of communication. I'm so pleased that you're all joining us today, wherever you're from, Nigeria, Montreal, out of province. It's so nice that you're all taking the time to really enhance your knowledge and skill sets, which today it's going to be all about communication. I want to ask you another question following Val's question as to where you're joining us from. Why are you guys here today? Why are you joining this event? And feel free to type in your responses in the chat box. To listen to Brendan. Yes, he is definitely an amazing communicator.
Sorry, I missed that.
One of the responses was they like to listen to Brendan. That's why they're here.
Oh, that's very nice. I paid that person to say that.
Learn some new strategies. Get insight. Awesome. So really the general vibe that I'm getting here is that people want to broaden their knowledge about communications and to learn strategies on how to further develop this skill. So today, it's going to be all about communication. Communication is a simple, fundamental concept that's existed since the beginning of time. And we can all agree on the fact that it has gained traction and popularity in recent times. It's being advertised as the skill that we all need in order to succeed. Employers are recruiting candidates who are excellent communicators. Schools are revamping their courses to be more interactive and engaging. So it's no surprise that communication is important and that it is one of the keys to success. Today, we're going to enhance our knowledge and our skill set of communication by looking at it through a series of questions and discussions. We're going to look at what is communication? Why is it important? The success stories behind it. What are the good characteristics of communicators? What are communication barriers? And we'll end off with some tips, strategies, and resources on how you can also become a powerful communicator. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce you to our powerhouse lineup of panelists today. In no particular order, we have Vanessa Perry. Vanessa is a communications advisor at Montreal-based company CAE, where she provides strategic communication advice to leaders. She's also a student in the PR and Communications graduate program at the SCS. Welcome, Vanessa. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here.
Would you like us to tell us a bit more in detail about what your role as communications advisor involves?
Yeah, so basically, I mostly focus on internal communications. I'm fairly new to the role. I come from a translation and editing background. However, I wanted to have a more strategic role in the company. Translation and editing is mostly execution, whereas communications, there is a lot of strategy and execution involved. So what we usually do, our day-to-day can consist of basically providing strategic communication advice to leaders. They seek our help with how to deliver their communications to employees. So this can range from internal communications campaigns, employee programs, events. We're often asked to develop and manage various communication tools such as our newsletters, our blog, presentations, our social media presence as well. That's mostly external at that point. I'm asked to produce different types of notices as well. So oftentimes it's either because we want to inform employees of something that's happening within the company, or we want them to take a specific action. Mostly, most employers nowadays, they have certain goals to reach within the company, and our role is to help them reach their goals. So we share the strategic goals that they have as well. So that's pretty much the bulk of it. It's never a dull moment in my role. There's always something new to learn. What's exciting about it is that my internal customers are from different departments, and I basically learn something new every day by working with these different teams.
Yeah, that's awesome that you're giving communications advice, but that you're also learning in return as well. That's definitely
Exactly.
a rewarding opportunity.
Definitely very fulfilling.
Thank you, Vanessa. We then have Brendan Walsh. Brendan has over 30 years experience as a professional communicator, copywriter, creative strategist, campaign manager, script writer, and counselor. He currently lectures in PR and business communication at McGill University. Great to see you, Brendan.
Good to see you, my fellow student.
Yes, so I actually had Brendan as an instructor for a communications course earlier this year, which was a terrific course. So Brendan, would you like to summarize? It's clear that you have experience in multiple fields related to communication. Do you want to perhaps touch on your experiences in these various fields, such as copywriting, screenwriting, script writing, etc.?
Okay, as you said, I've spent about 30 plus years in communications. I've covered just about every facet of communication you can imagine. I tell my students that once I learned the 26 letters of the alphabet and that you could form words and sentences with those letters, that you shouldn't be afraid to apply the knowledge you've learned to any other discipline. And I believe that if you can learn to write in one area, whether it's internal communication, external communication, you can turn your hand to PR, direct marketing, web writing, etc. I've worked for direct clients, and I've inside internally, but most of my life, communications life, has been spent as a freelance writer, working for different agencies throughout Canada, United States, even Europe. And that's about it. I've dabbled in screenwriting. I published my first novel a few years ago called The Boy and the Crow, and I'm at work on my second one right now. I guess that's about it. I'm teaching at McGill, been doing that for the last 11 years and loving it. I think it's one of the most rewarding of all of the careers that I've pursued, and it allows me to apply a lot of the knowledge that I've gained throughout that 30-year span.
That's amazing to hear. Thank you. We then have Elena Kratsios. Elena is a successful entrepreneur. She's the founder of her own company called Accent Walls, which specializes in customized backdrop media walls. She's currently a student in the Entrepreneurship Graduate Program at the SCS. Hi, Elena.
Hey.
Would you like to share with us the origin story of your company? So what inspired you to start it, how you got it up and running, and etc.?
Okay, yeah, it's actually a funny story. It happened as a mistake, which I think most crazy ideas do. I threw a surprise party for my parents' anniversary, and I was looking for a backdrop wall to take photos on, and I couldn't find it, so I tried making one, and people were like really into the idea. They were asking me who made it, where can I buy one? So I was like, oh, maybe there's a little market here. So that's how it started, and then that was about 2 years ago almost, and it's thankfully taken off and doing very well.
That's awesome. So it's quite new, but yet you're experiencing major growth. So congratulations.
Yeah, it's really fun. I mean, you deal with all kinds of different situations you never think you would, especially because we're trying to expand in different ways. So it definitely helps you grow, and I've definitely learned different ways to communicate with different characters. I will tell you that.
Yes, awesome. Stay tuned for that. And then last but not least, we have Lillian Itagiba. Lillian, sorry?
Itagiba, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Itagiba. Apologies. Lillian is the co-founder of Maverick Disruption, a transatlantic product development and validation consultancy. She helps medium to large-scale organizations to align their team around ideas, features, and market hypotheses in order to design products and services that customers really want. Lillian, would you like to explain what your company does to our audience members who may not understand a lot about consulting, etc.?
Yeah, so I'll try to cut a long story short, but basically my background has been in mostly technology and advertising, but I also have this creative background, which is from contemporary dance and fine arts and theater as well. So what we've done with Maverick Disruption is that we developed these methods of validations, which is based on the 4-phase process, and using some of our background, which have always been to simplify complex information, because of we have to explain things like technical information to creatives and stakeholders, but now we actually take it to a deeper level in a format of workshops, processes to actually help teams to actually find, to test their ideas, their business ideas, product features, services, and align around an idea, even though they come from different backgrounds, be it social, professional, age, anything. So let's say I'll have a workshop, involving creatives, finance people, marketing people. I need them at the end to speak the same language so that they can push forward a successful product to the intended customers. So I hope this makes sense.
It definitely does to me. Thank you so much. So I'm so glad to have all 4 of our panelists, Brandon, Vanessa, Lillian, and Elena, They're all experts in their own domains, and we're also excited to share our knowledge and expertise with you. So again, my name is Dhabisha. I'm the VP of Social Affairs for McGill's Association of Continuing Education Students, and I also work as an administrator here at McGill, and I'm a student in the Management Graduate Program as well. And throughout the event, please feel free to type in your responses, your ideas, your comments, leave some emojis in the chat box, because communication is best when it's a two-way street. So we don't want to be the only ones talking. We want to hear you guys speak as well. And if you have any questions, you can type in the questions in the chat box, or you can just simply say, I have a question, and I'll ask you to unmute yourself so we can hear you speak. So let's get the show on the road. We're going to start off by looking at what is communication. And I'm going to do a small activity where I'm going to ask all of you to think of one word or image that pops into your mind when you hear the word communication. So panelists, let me know, what is one word or image that you think of when you hear the word communication?
Simplicity.
Understanding.
Listening.
Sorry, Elena, did you mention something?
Oh, I literally forgot what I said. Understanding? Did I say understand?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Understanding, yes.
Understanding, okay. I'm gonna look at the chat box here. Would you mind reading the responses that we're getting in the chat box, please?
Sure.
That's good. That's true though.
What was it?
Well, somebody wrote stressful, but there's also decoding, learn, clarity. Well, there's a few.
Awesome.
People.
There's also dialogue in there.
Yeah. And peace. Oh, I love that.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a really good concept.
Yeah.
So let's look at everything that we've just received so far. What is communication? There is simplicity, we have clarity, understanding, stressful, which is indeed accurate. It's a dialogue, decoding, learning, peace, people. Very interesting concepts. And I think what we can all realize is that communication really has many different functions. It allows for knowledge sharing. So it ties in with the understanding aspect. It allows for information sharing. It allows for connections to be built, whether emotional connections or intellectual connections. So people, engagement, it enhances understanding and clarity, and it simply removes ambiguity. So it's no surprise that communication is really important. Now, why do you think that organizations nowadays are really emphasizing the power and importance of communication? I want to turn that to our panelists.
I think, if I may, the communication world is moving faster than a speeding bullet. It's changing every day. You just have to turn on your computer and there's a new app, there's a new way of communicating. Look at TikTok. Did you hear about TikTok a year ago, 2 years ago? And it's a multi-billion-dollar communication medium right now. And it's getting more challenging than ever to keep on top of all of these things. So I think more than ever, simplicity and clarity of message is important.
I do agree, yes. So even though we're having these different forms of communication, as long as simplicity is maintained, it's effective. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would add on to that as well, because obviously with all this the digital requirements now, it removes the human communication. You know, I mean, Twitter is the best example where communication can go completely wrong because it's so much easier to either be offensive or be misleading by not being able to see the person's reaction to what you're putting through. So whenever you communicate a message, it needs to be really clear in terms of who is that intended for. You know, do you actually have a real message, or are you just kind of just repurposing information? And if that's the case, do you research to make sure that what you're repurposing or reposting is not just like an echo chamber of, like, you know, as we've seen with things like riots and, you know, people getting kicked out. You know, some people can be really aggressive as well. So technology can be an enabler to allow us to communicate with people across the world, but at the same time, it can block us from removing the human, you know, the non-verbal, if you like. And even things like this, by seeing everybody on a screen, already helps.
Yeah, I definitely do agree that technology has definitely propelled or enhanced our awareness of how important communication is, and obviously comes with benefits and it comes with repercussions. Speaking with, you know, if technology has improved communication or if it is hindering it, Brendan, you have decades of experience communicating with individuals and organizations. In your opinion, what are the hallmark features of good communication?
Do you have that slide ready?
I do, yes.
Okay. Dhabisha is going to show you a communication formula that I put together for the very first class that I taught at McGill some 11 years ago, and it was internal communications. And what I do, I apologize for that bell, the phone ring. This communication formula I include in every single communication course that I teach at McGill and Concordia when I've taught there. And I've asked the students to solve it. And the first one, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, the W5. If you could think about that for a minute, what does W5, the acronym, stand for when it comes to communication? It's an integral part of journalism. Every good article that you see in a newspaper, magazine, or on the web should contain the 5 W's. Does anybody in our audience know what they are? Anybody answering, Dhabisha?
Let me double check. Okay. Yes, who, what, when, where, and why.
That's right. So every communication, even the communication that we have in front of us today, should address the audience. The who, you are all part of the audience. What is it about? The message today is all about communications. Where is it taking place? It's taking place online. When is it taking place? It's taking place today. And why is it taking place? Perhaps it's to give you more insights into what effective communication is all about. The H, what does the H stand for when it comes to communication? Anybody answering that, Dhabisha?
Yep, we have 2 people saying how.
Exactly. How are we doing it? Well, we have a moderator today. We have the massive, it's Macy's or Masses? Macy's team standing behind, helping support. And we have a panel of a panel helping to provide their expertise. And we have you as the participants. So we're participating in this Zoom meeting. That's the how. Then the next part of my formula is with him, or with, you could change the M to a Y. So you could make it with him or with Y. What would that stand for, audience?
So Jennifer says, what's in it for me?
Jennifer, did Jennifer take my course? It's an integral part of direct marketing principles. Every direct marketer who's trying to sell you a product or a service is interested in presenting the benefits of that product or service in the most optimal manner. So what's in it for me? What are the benefits of the communication? What is the information that you're trying to convey? And I tell my students that we're very romantic in our communications because we do a lot of kissing. And again, I ask the audience, what would KISS stand for?
Paul says, keep it simple, stupid.
He's almost right, except Paul, you are almost right, except one of my students corrected me some years ago. His name was Jeff Mullock, and he said that he doesn't call his children stupid, so could we change that? So we changed KISS from keep it simple, stupid, to keep it short and sweet, or if you prefer, keep it short and sexy. Okay? And I usually get a smile on that one. And on that point, I came across a quote from Albert Einstein the other day in an article I was reading about William Barr in the United States. And Einstein said, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. So if you can't present your sales message, your service message, your internal communication message well enough, if you can't prepare a simple and to the point resume, if you're looking for a job, you don't understand yourself well enough. So how do you expect the audience to understand you? The V is, what does V stand for, people? Audience?
Vincenzo says valid.
Sorry?
He says valid.
Valid, okay. I was thinking more in terms of value. What value does that communication have? Okay. Will it be beneficial to the audience? Will it do something? What effect will it have? Okay. How about E? What would the E stand for? This is something that I added recently, I think in the course that you took with me, Dhabisha. I updated this formula to include E. What would that stand for?
We have effect.
Effect, yes. I was thinking more in terms of evaluation. When you do an effective communication campaign or an ineffective one, you want to evaluate its effectiveness or its ineffectiveness. And JIT is a production term that I stole. What would you say that stands for?
Oh, we have just in time.
Just in time, exactly. Your communication should be timely. You don't want yesterday's communications going out today and vice versa. They should be right on time. And I added a $sign some years ago for, I think, a very important reason. What do you think the $sign stands for?
Maybe one of our panelists can guess.
It stands for budget.
Budget. If you've got $100 budget, and some of my students once had a $100 budget to produce a not-for-profit fundraising campaign for Haiti, for Haitian relief. And they kept pressing the person who was a prof at McGill, they kept pressing him for a budget because they needed something to work with. And he said, I'll give you $100. And that's all they had. And they came up with a communication campaign that was totally online, that used volunteer help, etc. So if you've only got $100, you can do so much. If you've got $5 million, you can do a lot more. And I'm saying if you put all of these elements together, they will lead to exponential success. And that if you practice these elements, if you practice effective communication, that your readers, your viewers who will see communications from you in the future will come to expect nothing but the best from you. That's about it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Brandon. So just to summarize, this is basically Brandon's hallmark formula for effective communication. We have the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why. We have how, what's in it for me, keep it sweet and simple, the value, the, what was the?
Evaluation.
Yeah. Just in time, and the cost or the budget, which will allow you to, which will basically pave the way towards exponential success. We actually have a question from Michael. He asks, could it also relate to the result in monetary gain? I'm guessing it refers to the last component.
Yes, it can. Exactly. Sure. Okay. If you're doing a direct marketing campaign or a web marketing campaign or a video marketing campaign, and you get an extra 20% or 50% in sales, yeah, you could include that in that symbol. Yeah, very much so. It's just a way of thinking about your communication. When you put your campaign together, ask yourself, have you really applied all of these elements? Okay, and if you apply them well, you should have great results. Simple as that.
Great, thank you so much.
There's a copyright beside the formula, but you can use it freely so long as you don't sell it on a t-shirt or something. Okay.
I want the entrepreneurs on our panel, so Lillian and Elena, to share a bit on what they think good characteristics of communicators are as well. So as founders of your own businesses, I'm guessing that you also oversee recruitment. So you're recruiting candidates to join your teams. Are there specific characteristics that stand out to you in candidates as markers of good communicators?
You can go first if you'd like.
So Lillian.
Sorry, okay. Now, yeah, for me, it's definitely somebody who's got a growth mindset and coming in with an open mind and being able to empathize. I have this thing about people, and that kind of translates across board, not just business, but also life, is for somebody to be interesting and interested. You know, so you come in, you're not just like coming in with your opinion and you just want to kind of reinforce that. I want you to be able to expect an outcome from your communication experience. So how do you do that? How do you, even if you disagree with somebody, that you don't let them leave the conversation? And I proceed through kind of several exercises to that, just from like my workshop background. And I used to be a visual facilitator as well. I mean, I still am. If you can see my very large boards, you know, for people here in terms of like connecting images and other ways of like visualizing a result based on not just words, but also that storytelling, another one. But definitely just expect to be changed. You know, for example, how you think, could that be false? You know, consider that option without actually, you know, feeling offended or feeling threatened. And then some little exercises that I also do in workshops, for example, rather than disagreeing with somebody initially, I might, you know, to continue a conversation when somebody is telling about something, you, instead of saying, I disagree, you're just saying, yes, and then, but you add on something to the conversation as opposed to just kind of like alienating them. I mean, there's several things, but these are definitely the kind of like, be open to change, be open to outcome, and be responsible for your vulnerability. Don't be threatened by other people's opinions or, you know, experiences of certain things.
Great advice, Lillian. How about you, Elena?
I really agree with you with everything you said, because those are things that I think are very important when you not only hire somebody, but work with somebody. So I'll give you an example. Like when I paired with my business partner, I really wanted to make sure that the person I launched a company with had the opposite characteristics to which I lack. So when we're in a meeting with a client, we're able to fully understand what they want. And, if something happens in the spur of the moment, we're both able to communicate with each other calmly. We need to make a change. We can't be hard-headed. We just have to do it. So for me, it's really important that the person that would, joins my team, that they're able to go with the flow, because in the business I work in, oftentimes nothing goes as planned ever. So you have to, you have to be willing to, go with the flow, see what happens, and you have to be able to adjust. Because if you're too like, it has to be my way, I'm not open-minded, I don't want to think about it, I believe that you're going to miss great opportunities for growth, not only for the company, but for yourself as an individual, So I think so. I think that's.
And I completely agree. And I almost add to that, what I often say to people, because we have so many different opinions in my workshops, people from finance to technology. And as Elena mentioned, opposite skills and understanding of certain information based on, who her partner is. And we have this thing of like, show, don't tell. Because it's very fair if you disagree with somebody, but you're just having an opinion. But tell us, what would be your alternative? How would you do that differently? And that's when you see the real interesting transformations, because when I do sometimes 5-day prototyping, and design workshops together, at the end, how everybody conglomerates into this kind of synthesized opinion that in the beginning made sense for no one, and now everybody's agreeing onto it. And that's when I see the transformation.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also important whenever, let's say you work with somebody, if they're, I don't know how to phrase this, sometimes people get nervous in confrontation, which is very normal because nobody, willingly wants to start a confrontation with someone. But I do enjoy seeing people that kind of come out of their shell a bit, because they start learning how they communicate better and how they can improve a situation without it becoming, big word, but hostile. There's ways to do it properly without it being an explosion. And if you're talking to someone that wants to just yell, it takes growth as a person for you to be like, you know what, yell, I'm going to be calm, but I know myself, now I can do this, So I think it's really about learning you. And once you figure yourself out, sky's the limit.
Totally.
Really, I totally agree with you. So the ability to be flexible and the ability to show and not tell. I really love that phrase. Definitely going to use that. It's interesting because I'm in the process of reading a book by Brene called How to Be a Daring Leader, and she talks about vulnerability and confrontation. So I'm wondering if anyone who's joining us today, have you read that book by Brene Brown?
I think I've seen a talk by her on TED, because she's quite famous, isn't she? About
yes, and she has her own podcast as well. Yeah, so Deanna says she's a fan of the podcast. So yes, so she talks about how vulnerability is really important in communication, because it builds that trust, it builds that connection. People want to hear you communicate, and there's already this pre-established connection it's a precursor to success in that way. So great points, ladies. So this actually brings us to another important point. It's that communication is not just verbal. Obviously, a lot of it lies in the nonverbal aspects of communication. So I was wondering, is verbal communication more important than nonverbal communication? Is it vice versa, or are they both equally important? So I got to the internet and I started searching, and there are a lot of stats that support the fact that perhaps nonverbal communication is more important than verbal communication. What do you all think about that? Thoughts and opinions?
Has anybody here heard of dual code theory? Any takers? Or maybe there's an answer. Because dual code theory is associations of humans with non-verbal and then verbal, because there's this argument that language, although it's been very useful for humans, it can also stall us into our voices and to our talking. And a lot of education is actually guilty of that, where you come in and it's all about input, 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 and there's no output. So what we want, because humans, have been communicating, for God knows how many 100,000 years, through all kinds of things, through art, to dance. One of the reasons why we got whites in our eyes is to be able to kind of like see where we're actually looking, how we're looking. We're constantly reading each other through gestures, and also we need to understand culture. And it's really fascinating when you actually learn about animals as well. Like, even animals have their own culture. And this is another thing why you have to be open whenever you walk into a room, be it different cultures from, for example, like I worked in corporate world, in the artistic world, in a catering world, and you can see all of what people are used to and not used to. And it's my job as a coach to show them it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to be open, but I'm giving you the safe space to do so.
Yeah, definitely body language, facial expressions, eye contact, those definitely complement the message itself when it comes to communication. Oh, we have an interesting comment here from Jennifer. As a mother of a son with autism, I totally see how much that actually does apply, even though many of us take it for granted. I agree. That is such an insightful response. Thank you for sharing, Jennifer. That's definitely true. Any other opinions, thoughts, comments?
I was just going to say, like, we were talking about like what consists of a great communicator earlier. And I mean, as mentioned, nonverbal communication does speak louder than verbal communication. Great communicators will listen with their eyes and ears. They pay attention to people's like posture, hand movements, eye contact, because that obviously does send very powerful messages. However, what's very interesting now is, at least in my case, like I've been working from home since the month of March, as are probably a lot of people, and you don't get to witness that nonverbal communication as much. So I feel that whenever I am in meetings or whenever there may be a certain misunderstanding, it's very important to just ask questions at that point, because it's easy to read a room when you're in a meeting with people in person. But in a virtual meeting, for example, like today, or just, obviously in your day-to-day at work, it's very hard to read a virtual room. So I think it's always important to ask questions like, does everybody understand? Is there anything that, I forgot to mention? Are there any questions? I took a summer course. Actually, Dhabisha and I were in this summer course together, and we had a really great professor who often asked us many questions to make sure that we really did understand. And I find it really invited students to just ask whatever questions they needed to ask. And obviously using the Zoom platform helps. But all this to say, like, she really did a great job, in my opinion, at really making sure that we understood. Because in a classroom, I guess it would have been easier for her to read the room, but obviously in a virtual classroom, it's not as easy. So I find there's like we don't get to witness that nonverbal communication as much now for those that are working remotely or taking classes online.
Did you find that you got to know the people more after the questions, that you were able to kind of empathize and see more things in common with them after this course?
Definitely. Actually, it's weird. I did feel like I learned more about them. That's an interesting point, because in class, I guess people are probably a little shyer to ask questions. Whereas, yes, online, in this online class in particular, people were really not shy to ask questions. And it's a great thing, because obviously you're there to learn, right? So.
And it seems like also, so by the teacher, resorting to asking questions, using that as a way to kind of gauge the room, it's not only to give us the chance to engage, but it's also for her to get some feedback as well. So we can really see there how communication really is two-way between the communicator and the receiver. Both need to trust one another, both need to feel solid and confident in that communication setting. So really good points. Michael says,
don't be afraid to listen to the silences.
Yes, that's a very good point. And there's like that 10-second pause in a virtual meeting. It's pretty awkward.
I don't know.
Yeah.
No, those 10 seconds really give you time to grasp the information that you just received and kind of just process it.
Mm-hmm.
Just
That's
take
true.
that time to process the information and make sure that you understood the message clearly. So silence is good.
And I totally agree, Dhabisha, because I even do little activities. For example, like I don't allow devices into my workshop, but I allow pens and paper, and I allow people to draw things, because whenever you draw something, you have to think about what you're trying to communicate and make that association and remember what people are saying. But the silences are really interesting. And I find it's a little bit more awkward online because it's a little bit more difficult to read. And there's some people that are more geared around that, like to feel the room. Apparently, women are very good at that as well, because that's our job, you know, because we're more vulnerable, we're more social to a certain extent. So as soon as we walk in, we need to figure out, okay, this person might be a threat, this person is a friend, this person needs this person needs help. And it's a great way, as soon as you walk in, and absorb that silence so that you get to know what people are like.
Awesome. Which actually brings me to another point. So a really good concept of good communication is nonverbal. So make sure that you're communicating well through your body language, your posture, other nonverbal cues. Going back to what Vanessa said, so we took a course called Organizational Behavior, and we covered communications. And one of the key aspects of good communication that we learned was also active listening, which kind of ties in the whole concept of silence as well. Does one of our panelists, want to explain what active listening is and what are the elements that make up active listening?
Active listening is a key component of the course that I teach on communication and networking skills at McGill. And I would say that active listening means being totally present in the conversation and being other-centered, not me-centered.
Mhm.
Okay, that's how I would sum it up.
Yes, other-centered versus me-centered. Very good point.
You're also not waiting for your turn to speak, right? That's like
exactly
a good component of active listening. Like you said, Brendan, you have to be present in the conversation, but you're not waiting for your turn to speak. I guess, Dhabisha, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we learned about this in our course as well. There's also another exercise that you can do, which is reflective listening. And that consists of repeating what the person just told you to maybe ensure that you actually understood what they said.
Yeah.
Yes. So yes, correct. Good point. So active listening is really when you're focusing completely on the person who's speaking. You're focusing on what they're saying, on the message that they're communicating to you, and how you can build trust with that person, or how you can let that person know that you're indeed listening to them, is by displaying short verbal or nonverbal cues. So like a simple nod of the head, or smiling, or saying small words of affirmation like yes, These are all really good tactics of active listeners. And another component of active listening is reflecting back the message. So if the communicator is saying something, try paraphrasing in different ways. And this allows the communicator to be like, wow, this person is really listening to me, which already builds a really good foundation and relationship there as well. Paul says, active listening. Does the person put as much energy into being a receiver as well as being a presenter? That's a very interesting question or thought. Any follow-up thoughts to that?
I think you do. I think you have to put, I think it requires a lot of energy on both ends, because if you don't really pay attention to what you're being told, if you misunderstand something, it can trickle into a disaster, which can end obviously terribly. So I think that as much as it's important to be able to communicate your point precisely and clearly, and clearing any questions up, I think it's equally as important and difficult to be able to listen properly, take in the information without having your brain rush to answer. Like, you have to be able to listen, understand, like digest it, then answer. So I think it's both in my opinion, at least on my end.
I agree with that, Elena, very much so. I think you've got to be on the same page As the person who's speaking, you've got to be totally present in that conversation, and you've got to commit not to be the problem solver. You've got to empower the other person to come to her or his own solution. And so you have to be respectful of where that person is at now. And as someone who has done a lot of counseling, I can tell you it's important to accept the client or the patient where that person is at that particular moment. It's not up to you to direct his or her life. It's you can help, you can offer insights if asked, but it's up to the other person to come to his or her own solution.
I agree.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's a really important point. Yeah.
I also really quickly, I also think it's important, at least like when you're selling stuff to people, I think like you were saying, Brendan, that when you're listening to, like, let's say your customer, I guess in my case, sometimes it's important to, like, you know, read through the lines, but listen through the lines. Because sometimes you have to know that you're just not going to reach an understanding. So you have to be able to say, you know what, thank you. Like, I'm understanding and hearing what you're saying, but I don't think ultimately we're going to reach a compromise. And I think being able to do that too is important, because like you're saying, you can't guide them to do what you want to do. It has to be an equal partnership, at least for communications.
Has anyone here heard about design thinking? It's a user experience term. Sorry, I'm loading you guys with terms just because of like what the techniques that I implement. But design thinking, if nobody's heard of it, and I can put some links after as well. It's all about putting the customer and the user of your products as in the center, you know, of your entire experience of your product. And every time they interact with your product, with your company, we want to create an empathy map of that person. Who are they? Who are you listening to? What are they saying? What are they feeling? What are they trying to do, you know, in order to achieve their goals or relieve their pains? And we work a lot with that, you know, when we're trying to define the problem that we're trying to solve within my groups or my workshop when we're creating a product. Because rather than thinking, I'm just going to push this product so we can make profit, we're thinking more as a product as this either a value creation approach, you know, from a value creation approach, or as a pain reliever for this customer that we really value. We value what they're trying to achieve. And we go through this whole process of interviewing the subject matter experts or the targeted customers themselves, and I tell everybody, you know, now pay attention. We're listening to them. We're living through their life in order to understand what we're creating as a potential solution for them.
Great. Thank you so much. So thanks for that thought. I believe it was Paul who said that. Yes. So it definitely does require energy investment from both the communicator and the receiver. Just to wrap up our conversation on communication, we looked at Brendan's hallmarks formula on communication. We looked at how nonverbal communication is really important, and we looked at how active listening and reflective listening are also super important as well. Let's move on and discuss what are some possible barriers to communication that we should be aware of, and if we can't avoid, then how can we possibly navigate through them? So any common barriers to good communication?
Fear? Like being nervous?
Okay, so how would you rephrase that as a barrier?
I guess, how would I rephrase that? I guess similar, like when you're, defensiveness. Yeah, like when you're, that was good.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pronouncing words. So language barrier is a really big communication barrier. It's a really common communication barrier as well. Yes, Simar-Preet.
I was going to say also when you're trying to translate like technical terms. So in my case, I work for a company where I would say like a good chunk of, like, out of 10,000 employees, around like 3,000 are engineers or come from an engineering background or come from a more technical background. So whenever the managers of those departments want to communicate something to their employees, us as communications advisors, we kind of have to translate what they're trying to say to make it accessible to all employees. So that could, I guess it's just more like technical jargon that's translated into more like everyday language. I know for myself, I've been working for this company for the last 2 years. And when I first started, I was completely new to the aviation industry. And I started off as an editor, so I was editing all the technical documents. I learned as I went along. But the one thing that I found was very important was just asking questions. Like, I constantly was asking questions, like, what does this mean? What does that mean? And luckily I had colleagues that were really patient and took the time to really explain certain things to me, things that were pertinent to my job, obviously, but also to get a general idea of the company and or the product in question. So I just think, like, it's like, as a comms advisor or just anyone that works in communications or with actual written documents, our job is to translate those technical terms into accessible material for all employees within the company.
Good point.
Yeah, I was going to add as well to Vanessa's point is obviously a complicated jargon in industry terms, you know, especially when the disciplines involved in your project or the group of people trying to understand are so different, is to not understand not only the perspective, but also what they're telling you. So it could be language differences, cultural differences, any kind of, you know, gender differences, age differences. And I think the key here is to be curious. Curiosity, I find, it really tackles the problem, because as soon as you're curious and you're ready to learn something different and new, it means that you're interested. And in that respect, then you start engaging with the person, and then everything, and they are forced to actually try to explain it to you in a language or communication means that will make sense to you. And then gradually, everybody then tends to participate. And if it's a group, for example, some people might chip in and help the other person explain. So it's all about being curious. You know, change, you know, like expect to be changed and learn something about not only the other person, but yourself as well.
I want to refer to what, sorry, Brendan, go ahead.
I just wanted to take up on that point. And I think it goes back to one of the elements in the communication formula, keeping it simple. If you want your audience to really understand that message, you've got to think, when you're writing, of making simple sentences and simple paragraphs, whether that writing is on the web or whether it's in print, whether you're doing it in a speech, and keep the audience in mind, because it's been proven that the more complicated sentences that you write, the higher the risk of misunderstanding. And particularly now, when we live in a very multicultural world, where I have students who sometimes speak 5, 6, 7, 8 languages. English may be their 7th or 8th language. If you're writing to these audiences or communicating to these audiences, think how you might convey that message in as few words as possible to ensure understanding. And my rule of thumb is, if I'm writing to a general audience, 17 to 20 words is usually my maximum. If I'm writing to a multicultural audience, I keep my sentences to around 10 words. Okay?
That's a really good tactic, yes. So really limit the number of words you're saying. Try and just convey the message that you want to convey in as little words as possible. Yeah. So there's another question that we actually received from Facebook. How do you know that someone has understood your message?
Well, for me personally, and especially in the experiences that I've had in what I do, it's when they understand the message, it means that they can teach. So they say, like, teach is, you know, people say teaching is the best form of learning, because as soon as you understand something and you're able to teach, it means you've got it. So whenever we do like an activity, an exercise, or take to a presentation or explain the whole infrastructure of an application that we're building, if that person can then explain that to someone, that's when my mission is done. And that's why, for example, like when I worked with a particular team, I want people to be product owners as opposed to like, solution or problem owners, as I say, because if we're creating a response to that problem that we're tackling into the market, I want even the developer, the designer, or even the person that's just like a PA to be able to explain that to anyone because they understood clearly during the workshops or the whatever we did, the prototyping process.
Yeah, and I want to refer back to what Brennan said earlier on in the discussion when he mentioned Einstein's quote. It's, you can actually summarize or explain the topic, then you know that you have a good understanding of it. So perhaps if you want to know if someone's just understood your message accurately, perhaps ask them to rephrase it or summarize it or explain it to you in different ways. And if they do that well, then you know that they got the point.
And the higher up in the organization you go, the more you have to understand what it is you're trying to say. Because when you're dealing at the executive level, the VP level, or the director level, you're lucky if you've got 5 minutes to explain. And Vanessa's nodding. Exactly what
their time is precious.
You're lucky if you can get 5 minutes. So you've got to get in there, right to the point. And if you don't understand your message, how the heck do you expect the VP to understand it? Right. And she will tell you.
I was also going to say, like, oftentimes, like us as internal communicators within an organization, we're not there to make noise, right? Like we often have, like every communication that goes out has a goal attached to it. And these are goals that often come from higher up or senior managers, for example, or just to contribute to our company culture. But oftentimes, like we want the employee to take a certain action. So, going back to the question that we got on Facebook, you'll know that your message got through to them if they took that action that you wanted them to take. So that's another way of measuring the effectiveness of your communication.
Because you must be able, and especially I think Elena also probably will know that in the startup world, you're often talking to investors and venture capitalists. And how do you explain your idea and how is that going to solve the world? You need some kind of a vision of that can be shared across all your teammates, all your companies, so that anybody and even your customer will be able to like describe it in a few words so that people can buy into that and you basically can exist as a startup.
Agreed, 100%. Beautifully said.
So do you want to share?
Can I just add? A good measure of how effective it is if you've explained it well to somebody, and that person can then explain it well to someone else. So that message cascades down so that next person understands it. It's like do you remember the penny post game we used to do at school where you get a second grader to tell a story or a joke, and then he or she's going to tell it to the next person, and that person tells it to the next person. Well, usually by the time you get to the end of the line, the story is completely changed.
That's actually called the telephone game.
Telephone game.
Oh, you're so funny.
In Ireland, they call it the penny post, but
yeah.
That is very true indeed. Do you want to share, perhaps, panelists, success stories or stories where ineffective communication just led to a mayhem? So just to illustrate to us how good communication has allowed you to achieve success in your academic, professional, personal lives, and vice versa.
I can give you a very hands-on example. I think communication is also very important written. So for example, in that sense, I mean like a good contract. Because at the end of the day, if there's a dispute, it's really what happened, what's on paper, what can be proven, the whole 9 yards. But once I had a client that refused to pay. So, the way we work is you pay your deposit and you pay the rest upon, delivery. And if it's a permanent installation, well, there's labor costs associated, right? Now, she didn't want to pay her labor, So she started yelling and screaming at me that it wasn't, she didn't have to pay, it's not legal, whole 9 yards. Anyways, but because she had signed my contract, it was communicated to her, it was highlighted, it was explained, it was written. She had nothing to say. She was like, oh, well, okay, that's it. So I think it's very important that, yes, to speak properly, but to really have your safety net is have it written that like, this was what was said, this is what you agreed to, that's it. And at least in my world, because bad communication can lead to no payment, which is not what you want.
Good point, Elena. Yes. So include important information in your communication materials. Don't miss vital info out.
Yeah, and don't be scared if like, I've learned that, like, don't be scared to say what you have to say because you're scared that you're not going to make the sale, or you're scared that the person's going to be mad at you. Like, make your point, politely, but stand your ground, because at the end of the day, you're your own sales rep. You're your own person that can deliver the message you want. So go for it. That's the best thing. And that's how I think you get good communication. When you put yourself out there, you can do a good job. I believe.
I think really it's a good point about like saying what you have to say, because communication is all about being honest. You have to say what needs to be said, but it's the way that you say that's really important. You don't need to be aggressive. You don't need to be violent or defensive. Say it in a very passive, in a very direct, very friendly manner, and the message is understood there, and it will most likely be well received. So the way you say your messages really determines how the receiver is going to take in it.
For sure, 100%.
I had this situation where I had a workshop of 15 people, and there was one technical product owner and a strategist that had a very different idea of what the scope of work, because it was a workshop about creating a scope, and writing scopes is a very complicated thing, especially already, even for technical people, so we had to do as a team, and the two of them wouldn't agree. And at one point it got quite heated, like all this argument. I almost walked out because we were like in a basement of this huge kind of like Desjardins branch where they had like meeting rooms, and then I basically just switched up the activity and I turned it into a kind of like, I called it Crocodile's Den to not call it Dragon's Den. And I was like, all right, so you've got this view, you've got this view, now you guys are gonna like assemble your little army, and you're gonna pitch that to the rest of us to see who actually can actually bring this forward in a more kind of understandable way for the rest of the team. And it was really interesting because at the end, they took that slight animosity that they had with them in this kind of healthy competition. It became like this team, and they were like supporting. And at the end of the project, they pitched it to the senior product owners who were actually, going to give the go ahead to this thing. And they found themselves in alignment. And he was like, well, we got the exact same solution for this thing in the end. It's just because it was worded differently. It was just lack of understanding. But because they had to, repurpose that and self-understanding into something that everybody could understand, they actually ended up, with the same solution, which was very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Michael has a question. I can imagine how important it is in legal documents, what Elena just talked about. Is it true that in the legal world they avoid punctuation because it can easily change the meaning?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure. But I can tell you that a good contract, it will be very blunt to what you're trying to say. Like, yes, you can argue in a court, you can manipulate your way around it, but at the end of the day, if you're communicating that this is how much you owe me, that's it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, So long as like harm wasn't done, like maliciously, then you're okay, But I don't know if they avoid punctuations. I'm not sure. I don't think so. But
there is a case. I just answered Michael privately. If you go online and look up Rogers communication contract, missing comma, you'll see a story in there about how a misplaced comma cost $2 million.
Crazy.
Because the misplaced comma changed the entire reading of the clause to follow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Punctuation is important. Students.
We studied that with Shakespeare when I was doing acting, because you know they've got a pentameter, because with Shakespeare plays they didn't used to have punctuation. It's how you act them that actually evokes the whole story, because it makes no sense, and it's got like this 5 kind of sacred cadence, if you like. But with legal contracts, I don't know. I have never thought about that, but it's an interesting little bit of information.
Yeah, legal is its own language. I really believe that it's its own jargon.
Well, so just to contribute like one little final note maybe on that, like I did take a legal translation course during my undergrad, so I don't have any experience in like writing legal documents, but I do know, as you mentioned, Brendan, punctuation is crucial in legal documents. And yeah, I guess that Roger story, I think I came across it as well in the past. That comma makes all the difference. And I had a professor back during my undergrad that basically stressed more than once, like the punctuation in legal documents is extremely important. Like the way where you place your commas and whatnot, it can make all the difference, as is the case with the case study that you sent to Michael, Brendan.
Just on that point, if I may too, because I think it's important to communications, you have to be ruthless editors of your own work.
Mm-hmm.
And nowhere, I see Vanessa nodding again. I bet you, Vanessa, all of the communications that you write for CAA, you don't get an A in everything that you write. It's not perfect every time, right?
No.
Because you've got this pecking order. People throughout the organization will change it. They'll change 6 to the numeral 6, from SIX to the numeral, and the next guy will change it back. You've got all these personalities to deal with. So if you want to do well as a writer in communications, develop a very, very thick skin.
Definitely. I don't take anything personally anymore. I used to at the beginning, but that's actually so true, because whenever, I'll start up with a rough draft of a communication that needs to go out, and it'll change so many times. It can go up to like 20 versions. We'll be like at version number 20. It can get pretty extensive, but that's why oftentimes we do involve different teams. Whenever we are creating a communication, we'll have a multidisciplinary team of different employees, different managers, essentially, who will have their input, and that has to be incorporated in the communication itself. So yeah, my version 1 will be very different from my version 20 of the communication.
Direct marketing copywriters keep their sanity by practicing the adage, "Where the heck were you when the paper was blank?" The people above you and below you can make all of these changes, but let's face it, you're the one who started with a blank piece of paper. So you get credit for whatever you started with, okay? So take solace in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Vanessa. How does everyone here find emojis since they got introduced in written communication? Do you have how did it change the experience of written communication for you?
I love them.
Good question, Lillian.
I love them. I think they're cool. The thumbs up is just how I feel.
Yeah.
Oh, and Valerie
says,
mentioned.
Yeah, she personally loves them, Valerie says.
As well as the GIFs.
Yeah.
That's a game changer.
Emails.
I wouldn't use them high up in an organization.
No.
Depending if I'm dealing it on an equal level with colleagues, a thumbs up. I don't know. I think Dhabisha, you sent me something today, and I think I sent you a smile times 10,000.
Yeah. 10,000
smile. I don't have to say thank you for your lovely email of such and such a day, and go on and on. That says it all. So
the thing is, like electronic communication, we touched upon this before, there's no human, there's no the nonverbal part to it. So emojis really incorporate that humanness, that intimacy into it, that connection. So I do definitely think using emojis and any other visual appeal in our electronic modes of communication, it's fine when it's done well.
Yeah.
I find the actual companies are starting to do that. Like sometimes some quite pretty official people, because you know how email is such a horrible form of communication. sometimes, like when you send an email and you feel a bit blank, like you imagine the person like being poker faced or something and the message doesn't get through. And now I'm seeing much more people like, smileys and thumbs up, obviously not so much, in a more kind of like cheeky stuff, but certainly some of them are really becoming standard now, even across officials. I wonder if it's going to change corporate communications in future.
I think a lot of the organizations are more flat and therefore have no problem breaking the molds of like standard communication and throwing in those emojis in their communication if they want.
Just remember, you have to be careful which way you point the finger, right?
Definitely. I guess what Brendan mentioned before, like if you're speaking with senior managers and higher up, I wouldn't put any emojis in my emails or in any communication at that point. But then it just depends on who the person is, right? Or how well you know the person. Like I know in the case of my manager at the beginning when I first started, well, my former manager now, there weren't any smileys in my emails. It was just like a few, maybe one or two exclamation points here and there. But it was only like maybe a year in where he started putting smiley faces in his emails to me. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess he does that. So I can do it too. It's something so minor, but I tend to overthink these things a little bit too much. There's a lot of memes on that actually, like how many exclamation points in an email is like considered like too much, or same thing with emojis. But I guess it really depends who you're talking to and who you're communicating with.
I think as soon as like your superior starts incorporating emojis in their communications with you, you're like, we're
It's
friends
safe.
now.
Yeah, it's safe. You can do it.
Exactly, we're cool.
The smile is more common, isn't it? You see smiles and little dots with a happy face. You see the smiles a lot more.
Yes.
Even like tech support, sometimes when I ask inquiry on a website, I get like the little smiles and stuff.
Yeah, they're quite standard. Yeah, because in real life you will be smiling, right? You're not just going to be like saying words with no expression.
I wish there was one for nodding, because we often like, even on a phone, I'm like, yeah. It's like, especially like being Brazilian, I'm always like hands, and like just late all the time. So it's like there should be a way of illustrating that.
It's true. So we're going to wrap things up, and in closing, I invite our panelists to share their tips, their strategies that has personally allowed them to upend their communications game.
Okay, so I guess I guess I'll go first. I kind of mentioned it a little bit before, but it's important to know what you're talking about. And I think this was also mentioned before by someone else, but knowing what you're talking about, what your goal is, and just being concise in your messaging, I find like those three things have really helped me in both my personal life and my professional life. And also, I mean, this was said before, but just ask as many questions as possible to really get to the bottom of things. I find that's what's always really helped me, because oftentimes one of the communication pitfalls I've experienced was due to lack of information or just not asking enough questions to begin with. So I think those elements, they seem very basic, but it's often forgotten. And I believe that that's what helped me a lot to this point. And even when you're starting off a new job, for example, like just ask any question you have. In my case, I always ask questions to avoid making mistakes and to just avoid having that self-doubt. So those are my essential communication tools.
Yes, love that.
I've got a few, but things, for example, like be curious. That's one of the ones that I really think that's quite important. But also don't make assumptions. You might have like, a Trump lover, in your team that, you might have to find things in common with. And what I also found helpful is to learn something about the person and their names. There's even like a little game, that I do for introducing large teams of people. It's called the arm lock. I mean, we can't do that under Corona now, unfortunately, but it's all about you introduce yourself and you say something about yourself. And if somebody else has got something in common, they come and lock your arms. And the goal of the game is that we have a huge circle with everyone, until we can find something in common. So learn something about the person and expect change, expect outcome, expect you to walk out of that room with a completely different opinion or learning something new.
I like that, because communication is often about, okay, you know, what am I trying to get or what am I trying to understand? But really, you should try and learn about the other person as well. It really is a two-way street. You're gaining information, but the other person is also getting value out of this. So good point. Anyone else?
I would say be yourself, be other-centered. As Vanessa said, you don't have all the answers, and you can't move the world alone, so get help. I think when you first start out in communication, you think that you know everything, and you don't. And usually you're not the knowledge provider. Usually you have to go to someone else to get that information. Your job is to communicate that knowledge, okay? And be thick-skinned when it comes to having your work reviewed.
Yes.
Particularly if you're a student, and that's hard.
I think I would just add, like, I think you guys hit all the points, but I think I would just add that be confident in your abilities. Even if you feel like you're missing something or lacking it, you probably have some communication skills that other people wish they had or like are in the process of learning. So I feel if you really truly believe in yourself, this sounds cheesy, I know, but that's the first step to being able to communicate your message, because you'll have the confidence to say, this is what I want, I don't agree to that, this is what it is. And it allows for openness, no crazy screaming, just to the point. So believe in yourself, and that's what I think it is as well.
Totally agree, Elena. I think we all have something
Definitely.
to teach and all have something to learn from each other. It doesn't matter what your background or where
Yeah.
Just made me think of a man 30 years ago who was helping me do renovations on my home. And we had to cut a hole in the roof. And he handed me the jigsaw to cut the circle hole. This is the first time I was doing major reno. And he knew I was scared. And he looked at me and said, this guy only had grade 4 education, by the way. And he could build a house and rebuild it any way you want. And he said to me, never be afraid to do what another man can do. And I think he would probably today say what any other man or woman can do, okay? So don't be afraid to try different things.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Definitely.
All very wise words. Thank you so much. So we have just under 2 minutes left. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists today for dedicating your time, your offering your knowledge and your personal stories. It has just, like, I feel like I know so much more about communications, and I have like a toolkit for communications right now. And I also hope that everyone who joined us today, they're taking something out of this and becoming powerful communicators. I'd also like to congratulate the entire CATS team for organizing such a successful conference this entire week. So kudos to the entire CATS team, including Deanna and Valerie. And I believe that if you'd like to connect with us virtually, like finding us on LinkedIn, for example, our LinkedIn links will be displayed in the chat box very shortly. So thank you all. It was such a pleasure being here, and I'll pass it on to Valerie.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to really quickly copy paste the links in there. Wow, you guys were absolutely phenomenal. Thank you for your insights. As Dhabisha said, it was such a treat. And I love the saying, you learn something new every day, and you guys just proved that again. I took away a lot of gems today. On behalf of McGill University, McGill School of Continuing Studies, CATS, and Macy's, thank you so much for joining us for Power Skills. We hope to do this again soon in the near future. Stay connected with us. Deanna, if you don't mind putting our links in there as well. Thank you all, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Nice. Nice to find out a lot about you. I feel like we all communicated, and I feel like I've got like new faces to like backstories. It's a great
Emojis.
Yeah, exactly. We got emojis, everything.
All right. Have a beautiful Saturday, guys.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.